there is a moment almost nobody remembers. Not because it never happened. Because it happened while everything still looked normal. The conversations hadn't disappeared. The routine still existed. The familiar places hadn't changed. Nothing dramatic announced the ending. If someone had asked you then whether anything was wrong, you probably would have said no. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe life had become busy. Maybe this quiet distance was temporary. But what if the ending had already begun? What if the person you were trying to hold onto had already started building a life where your absence no longer created a space that needed to be filled? Most people imagine replacement as something sudden, a decision made overnight, a dramatic turning point, a single betrayal that explains everything afterward. Reality is usually quieter than that. People rarely wake up one morning feeling completely different. They change by degrees. Tiny shifts accumulate beneath ordinary days until one morning the relationship you're trying to save no longer exists in the form you remember. The frightening part is not that people change. The frightening part is how invisible the process is while you're standing inside it. That is why so many endings feel impossible to explain. You search your memory for one catastrophic event, one sentence, one mistake, one argument that broke everything. Instead, you find dozens of ordinary moments that seemed meaningless at the time. A laugh that lasted a little less. A silence that stayed a little longer. Plans made with less excitement. Familiar conversations that slowly became obligations instead of discoveries. None of those moments looked important. Together, they changed everything. Human beings rarely lose connection all at once. We lose it through adaptation. The mind is remarkably efficient at adjusting to emotional absence. At first, someone misses your presence. Then they learn to tolerate your absence. Eventually they organize their emotional world around the fact that you are no longer essential. That transition almost never announces itself. It simply becomes normal. This is why people often say the breakup, the friendship ending, or the emotional distance felt sudden, while the other person insists it had been happening for months. Both experiences are real. One person lived through the gradual adjustment. The other only noticed when the adjustment became impossible to hide. It wasn't the ending that was sudden. It was your awareness. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that memories can preserve a version of reality that no longer exists. Your mind keeps replaying moments when you still mattered the same way. You remember shared laughter, familiar habits, the effortless comfort of believing your place in someone's life was secure. But memory freezes moments. People do not. While you were protecting old memories, the emotional landscape was still moving. Without realizing it, you were comparing today's reality to yesterday's certainty instead of today's reality to today's truth. The difference is subtle, but devastating. When people become familiar, we stop measuring change. Familiarity creates emotional blindness. We notice dramatic transformations, but gradual ones disappear into routine. It is like watching a clock. The hands move constantly, yet the movement becomes invisible because it happens too slowly for conscious attention. Relationships often end the same way. Nothing seems different on any single day. Until one day everything is. There is another reason replacement feels so shocking. Most of us assume that importance is permanent. We believe that once we become deeply woven into someone's life, that place will remain ours forever. We confuse history with permanence. But history only proves that something existed. It does not guarantee that it continues. People carry old photographs without living in the old houses those photographs depict. They cherish memories while building completely different lives. Affection works much the same way. Someone can genuinely value what you once shared while no longer depending on that connection to feel emotionally complete. That realization hurts because it challenges something fundamental. We want to believe that being deeply known makes us irreplaceable. Life keeps reminding us that these are not the same thing. The strange thing about emotional replacement is that another person is not always involved. Sometimes the replacement is a new routine. Sometimes it is work, ambition, independence, healing, responsibility, or simply becoming comfortable with solitude. We often imagine replacement as competition with another human being. More often, we are replaced by adaptation itself. The human mind protects itself by filling emotional gaps with whatever allows life to keep moving. Over time, the empty space where you once existed stops feeling empty because something else has quietly occupied it. Not necessarily something better. Just something consistent enough to make your absence less disruptive. That is why returning after a long emotional distance can feel so confusing. You expect to resume a role that no longer exists. The habits that once revolved around you have found new centers. Conversations flow differently. Decisions happen without your involvement. Your absence has already been practiced enough that your return feels unfamiliar instead of comforting. Nothing cruel had to happen. People simply adapted. Adaptation is emotionally invisible while it is happening. Only afterward does it become obvious. There is a painful illusion many people carry without realizing it. They believe consistency always creates security. If they remain patient, dependable, available, and understanding, the connection will naturally preserve itself. Consistency certainly matters. But consistency cannot stop change. People evolve through experiences neither of you predicted. Priorities shift. Responsibilities multiply. Identity expands. New versions of ourselves emerge quietly beneath ordinary routines. Sometimes two people simply stop growing in the same direction. No dramatic betrayal is required. Distance can emerge simply because two emotional maps no longer point toward the same destination. When that happens, one person often keeps navigating using an old map. The other has already begun drawing a new one. That is why conversations begin feeling strangely repetitive. You are speaking to who they used to be while they are responding as someone they are still becoming. Neither of you fully notices the difference. Until eventually it becomes impossible not to. Perhaps the hardest realization arrives afterward. You discover that you weren't replaced in a single moment. You were slowly becoming less central while still believing your place was unchanged. It feels almost unreal because your emotional timeline stopped moving. Hope has a peculiar effect on perception. It convinces us that tomorrow will naturally resemble yesterday. It encourages us to interpret warning signs as temporary interruptions instead of permanent transitions. Hope can preserve us. It can also delay acceptance. Looking back, people often notice details that once seemed insignificant. The growing pauses. The reduced curiosity. The shrinking enthusiasm. The subtle feeling that conversations were continuing out of habit instead of genuine excitement. None of those moments seemed large enough to matter. Together, they formed the entire story. The mind rarely recognizes patterns while living inside them. It recognizes them afterward. That is why hindsight feels so merciless. Everything suddenly makes sense. Not because new evidence appeared. Because distance finally revealed the picture the individual pieces had always been creating. There is a quiet grief in realizing someone did not necessarily stop caring. They simply stopped needing the relationship in the same way. Need changes more often than affection. And that distinction confuses many people. Affection can remain while priorities evolve. Respect can remain while closeness fades. Gratitude can remain while dependence disappears. Those emotional combinations seem contradictory until life forces you to experience them. Then they become painfully understandable. Perhaps that is why replacement feels less like being defeated by another person and more like becoming invisible inside a story that continued without you. Life did not pause to wait for certainty. It kept moving. Everyone involved adapted differently. Some adapted sooner. Some later. Some never realized adaptation had already happened until they tried to return to a place that no longer existed. Maybe the deepest lesson hidden inside experiences like these is that endings rarely begin with goodbye. They begin with unnoticed adjustments. With emotional gravity shifting so gradually that nobody hears it happening. With ordinary days that seem completely harmless while quietly rearranging the architecture of two lives. That is why memories can feel warmer than reality. Memory preserves emotional certainty. Reality never stops changing. And perhaps that is the haunting truth so many people struggle to explain. By the time you finally understood what had happened, nobody had deliberately erased you. Nobody had announced your replacement. Nobody had stood in front of you and declared that your place had disappeared. Life had simply continued. New habits formed. New rhythms emerged. New emotional foundations settled into place. Not because your past meant nothing, but because time rarely asks permission before it reshapes the lives we thought were permanent. Maybe that is why this realization stays with people for years. Not because they were abandoned, but because they discovered that the quietest changes are often the ones that redefine an entire life. Long before anyone says goodbye. Long before certainty collapses. Long before the silence finally becomes impossible to ignore. Some endings have already happened. And the hardest part is realizing that the person who disappeared from someone else's world was still standing there, believing they had never left at all.